Klaus Larres is a professor of history and international affairs at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. He joins us today from London. Really appreciate your time, Klaus. Now, this attack on the port in Odessa, as we just heard in that report, has been described as a spit in the face by Russia with no intentions of honouring this deal. Is that a fair assumption to make, do you think, given this attack, or does this deal still have a chance?
I think the deal still has a chance, not least because Russia needs the deal as much as Ukraine needs the deal. Of course, it is very surprising to have an attack just in 24 hours after that agreement was signed. And one can just speculate what the Russians may have led to embark on that attack. But it doesn't mean that the grain deal is dead. There is an operation center which has been set up in Istanbul, where already the Russians, the Turkish, the Ukrainians, and the United Nations are cooperating. And I think in a few weeks' time, we will probably see the first caravan of ships going into the port of Odessa, loading up with grain and other wheat facilities and fertilizers, and leave again that port to furnish the global markets. One reason why Russia needs it is because its economy is really being hit very severely by the sanctions. Secondly, the global south, the developing world, has become rather annoyed with Russia that it blocks grain deliveries to the outside world. And there's been an enormous pressure on Putin by the developing world to do something about it. And as we know, the developing world, these countries, many countries in Africa and the Middle East, are actually supporters of Putin. And Putin wants to maintain their support. So he was under pressure to do something about the grain situation.
But if there is no enforcement system or ceasefire in place, keeping in mind that these ships operating will be moving through a war zone, how secure is this operation? Is there any way to guarantee safe passage of the ships to transport this grain?
It is a highly dangerous situation. The agreement agreed on providing channels of safe passage from observed by Turkey, for example, from the Bosporus into Odessa and two other Ukrainian harbors. And these safe passages are meant to be free of mines. The Ukrainians have promised that that will be the case. And the Russians have promised not to attack any of these merchant vessels. And the Turkish will actually inspect any vessels going towards Odessa and find out whether or not they contain any weapons on board. The Russians find that important, have insisted on that. And I think under these provisos, there is some hope that the agreement will hold and that grain deliveries will actually start to take place in the next few weeks. Of course, there's no guarantee at all. It is a highly dangerous situation. We are, as you said, operating in a war situation. But all parties concerned, the Ukrainians, the Russians, and of course the United Nations and the Turks, are very interested that that grain deal comes to fruition, because the world is suffering. Almost 50 million people are suffering from hunger because of the war in Ukraine, and that cannot be tolerated. And I think that deal was reached because of that. So there is, I would say, some hope that the deal will be come to fruition and will be successful in the end.
So how much grain are we actually talking here, and how does it translate into the market? We heard in the report earlier that some Middle Eastern countries use 60% of their wheat comes from Ukraine. How does that translate for the rest of the world?
Yeah, before the war, Ukraine was the 5th largest wheat exporting nation in the world. In terms of figure, that means there are 22 million tons of grain waiting in Ukrainian silos to be exported. And of course, they have to be exported very quickly because they are rotting away. That is last year's harvest, and that harvest will be spoiled pretty soon. So it needs to be exported really as a matter of immediacy, and that is probably one of the reasons why that grain deal was eventually struck after 2 months of negotiations.
You mentioned that Russia was under a considerable amount of pressure to go along with this deal, but it's reportedly taken control of more than 1/5 of Ukrainian cropland and has been accused of stealing hundreds of thousands of tons of Ukrainian grain products. So it's, of course, critical to Ukraine's economy. Is there something else that's that's in it for Russia here? Do they also have a strong economy in the same industry that they need to kickstart again as well? It doesn't seem like, bullying from Western nations and concerns about sanctions has stopped them now. Why is it that they'd be willing to sign this deal? What's in it for them?
Yeah, Russian exports of fertilizers and grain have also been severely impacted by the war. While there are no Western sanctions on Russian exports of grain, it is very difficult for Russian ships to find international insurers, for example, who would trust that these exports could take place. So that deal will also help the Russian economy a lot, because Russian fertilizers, Russian grain will also be exported onto the world markets again. And that was actually that so-called quid pro quo of the deal. The Russians only agreed to the grain agreement with Ukraine if they also got their own deal, and that has been agreed. So in the end, it is really a win-win situation. The Russian economy will definitely win, but the Ukrainian economy, of course, will win as well. And the world situation as such, the world poverty crisis, the world food crisis, hopefully will be alleviated because of that very important deal.
Well, let's hope it sticks. Klaus, thank you very much for your time. Klaus Larres there from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill.